distinguished panelists already with us this afternoon. I will start the webinar and just before, I'd like to welcome everybody to the second series of our three-series webinar session on pro-health taxes. Some of you may have joined us on Tuesday when we started the series off and we at examining, does Nigeria need as you know, or most of you will know, the Minister of Finance recently introduced tax and excise duty on sugar sweetened beverages. And what this will mean is 10 naira per litre of, 10 naira will be levied on a litre of sugar sweetened beverages going forwards. And, you know, we all are quite familiar with discussions about whether this is a good policy or whether it's not, and also the health implications of such a tax, health implications of drinking excess sugar sweetened beverages. So the purpose of our web series is really to put forward the discussion, push forward this discussion and really present from the mostly health angle the benefits of putting in place such a prohibition as nice. Our webinar today is titled Building a Strong Advocacy Campaign for Sugar Taxes in Nigeria. And we've invited a diverse range of media practitioners who can lend their voices and how do we present a strong voice and mount a strong campaign to really focus on the impact of such a tax and really put forward a strong communications and media engagements to really promote the benefits of having such a sugar tax. With us, who many of you will know, veteran in media in Nigeria. She's CEO of the International Society of Media in Public Media. And I think she will start with, her opening remarks where she'll Mrs. Makonja will really outline for us really from a media perspective, why we should mount a very strong advocacy campaign to discuss the pro-health taxes in Nigeria. As we've already seen, industry has started to respond to this tax that's been introduced. We've seen media articles and the likes written and some coalitions already putting forwards from the industry's perspective why such a tax may not be good for a country like Nigeria. And throughout this afternoon, we really want to highlight and engage the media in how do we present this discussion to a much broader audience who may not fully understand the pros and cons of having this discussion. On Tuesday, during our first webinar session, we were pleased to have Dr. Mandeville from the World Bank. And she really presented from a global perspective how other countries have fared in introducing a tax on their sugary drinks. And one of the things she highlighted is we are now one of the many countries, in total globally, about 66 countries or so, have introduced such a such a tax on sugary drinks with the aim of improving health. And the secondary objective is really to also raise revenue, because ultimately we know that the taxes that will be raised from such a pro-health tax needs to be channeled back through a vehicle that we all know is severely underfunded, which is the health sector. So as the Honorable Minister of State for Health also reiterated on Tuesday, this funds need to be earmarked for health. We know that 1 in every 17 adults in Nigeria suffers from diabetes, which amounts to about 11.2 million adults. There are other implications of excess consumption of sugar sweetened beverages, for instance, tooth decay, type 2 diabetes, as I mentioned, weight gain, obesity, cancer. Dr. Bagudu, the CEO of Medicaid Foundation on Tuesday, highlighted very high costs of treating cancer in Nigeria. And ultimately, a lot of these pro-health taxes will raise revenue that will be channeled through programs that support people who are suffering from a lot of the NCDs that we've highlighted. And this discussion is really important because not only does it heighten the health benefits of introducing such a tax, but also raises public awareness. We don't often talk about the impact of NCDs in Nigeria. I think we're still at that stage in this country where we're still battling with communicable diseases, cholera, Lassa fever, and the like. But increasingly, we're having increased rates of NCDs. And so what this type of discussion also raises awareness about all the other health effects of sugar-sweetened beverages. Not only that, in the UK, as was highlighted again on Tuesday, it also incentivizes industry to think about reformulating their products. So in as much as we talk about a loss of sales, the levy that was introduced in the UK actually incentivized industry to reformulate their products so that they're healthier. So I think, just summarizing, the purpose really of today is how do we, mount a very strong advocacy campaign to reiterate and inform industry why we feel this is an important tax, and also push forward for consumers who may see this as punitive. But ultimately, the benefit is to improve the health of Nigerians. So without further ado, I'll just welcome our first speaker. But before I do so, just to remind you and to encourage you to please drop any questions you may have in the Q&A function. We have the opportunity for the questions to be answered during the question and answer session. So you're happy to introduce yourself in the chat function, so we know who else is joining us this afternoon. But please drop your questions in the Q&A function, and if you choose to, you can be specific who you want these questions to be addressed to. We have today from Gatefield, Ome Bongos, who will be moderating for the rest of the afternoon. I'm just giving the welcome remarks and welcoming you all to this webinar session this afternoon. So without further ado, Mrs. Makanjala, welcome, and we are here to listen to your opening remarks. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you everyone who linked up to this very important development. And I'm also pleased to have been invited to share my thoughts moving forward on these major good news that have hit us since the harmful food taxes pro-health law has come into being. So my text is going to be really giving a little background, because I wasn't sure of who and who would be listening, but if my colleagues are there out listening, just give a little background, then speak to the fact of what we as media practitioners can do moving forward, and getting these actualized, and our responsibilities, and of course giving us a general framework of how these impacts on our life. Vivian has alluded to these in her opening remarks, but this conversation has to go on, and we keep reminding ourselves of what we as a nation and as a people can gain being part of this. I'd like to address it as movement as we move on. So I would share my text later on, and I'm sure that all participants will get a copy. But for these presentation, I'm just going to read through. After all, it's just I assume it's just a wake-up call, kind of, as we move on in this program today. So a major good news today, and in the public health space, is that Sugar Sweetening Beverages Act has been passed into law as part of the larger finance law framework. And I think it's long overdue, so we welcome it. Whichever way it passed, it is a welcome development. It might point us in the direction for quality of food and our consumption of them and life, as a major determinant of our health status. The need to realize that you are what you eat drives the need to eat right and becomes an imperative in everyone's mind. The tax, if you ask me, is not significant enough for the good it can do, but it is surely additional revenue for health purposes if applied to health and the sector. Can it be a sufficient deterrent to stop and reduce consumption of these risk to health foods and their inherent dangers, especially as we know about the low-income daily wage laborers whose staple food often is bread and sugar-colored water in various brands? This is a conversation for all health-loving, health-seeking, and health-conscious citizens and all. Health, and I dare say holistic health, is the right of all humans, whether in developed, developing world, or underdeveloped societies. When we consider the universal health coverage for all human and other beings on earth, we must consider harmful food taxes and our application of its pro-health, because it should rightly be channeled to the basic health care provision fund that we have in Nigeria to create more financial protection for the health of vulnerable populations. This will be financial inclusion for their health care provision and, of course, services. Now, let's speak to ourselves as media practitioners. Now that we have the law, and thanks to for the Freedom of Information Act 2011, we should be in the forefront, not only to track it, but also to track harmful food consumption and, of course, all unhealthy consumptive items as individuals and as a nation. And more importantly, because we are the eye, the say, and ear of the society, we must strive to enlighten and create awareness using our various platforms and all available channels. We must be the voice of reasoning, of sanctity, and of truth. It is the right of all Nigerians to have any and every information, not only on taxes, but all on wholesome consumption patterns. And the duty belongs to us, media practitioners. There can be no compromise. There must be no sacred cows, because there is no trade-off for lives. Human development, science, and technology have advanced, but so far, we do not have replacement for human lives. It is the only irreplaceable precious commodity, sorry to describe it as this, that is of inestimable value. So conversations around this class of taxes must be on our diverse platforms, even on our spaces, to engage us on the social media, because the cost of life is incalculable, both to the poor and rich alike. We must estimate cost of treatment, some of the impact of these sugar-coated foods that we take on a very daily basis. I'm sure even as we engage in this conversation, maybe if we can look around, we'll see that there must be a big bottle of sugar-coated drinks that is available at a lot of the desks. So the fallouts of sugar consumption are huge, the experts say, and the cost to our economy and national development and growth are best imagined, because when calculated, it does not represent the reality of emotional trauma and mental losses when, of course, these diseases come in. Therefore, sugar must be made, like all health degrading commodities, to pay for its toll on our health and our national strategic health plans. It could never offset all of our individual or societal losses financially in reality, but might reduce our burdens and alleviate our pains and trauma. Now, our consumption of such, not thinking or knowing of its toll on our long-term health and its attendant, dependent or progressive diseases, the list of which is growing, all lifestyle and non-communicable diseases, and I'm sure Vivian has alluded to this, but we need to stress it and remind ourselves all the time, therefore, are completely avoidable. These, for example, nowadays predisposes even to COVID-19 and its many variants and newer developments. Be that as it were, we must now tread the path of correction of all structured health system-driven societies. We have to increase our advocacy levels until we begin to envision or to see results, that is, reduced consumption and sugar paying for its ravages on our national health and making restitution for it, or at the very least, subsiding our health costs and boosting our health investments, which in any case are too little and badly needed, this sugar taxes. Now, the cost of sugar introduction in our food and drink value chain is enormous if health is truly wealth. And not paying for sugar damages in taxes is nothing but further decimating the health and wealth of our nation and our family structures. That money can be better used to restore health and its auxiliary services. Financing health requires sugar tax, and I must say this to us because we all know the state of our healthcare delivery system, and we could do with, variety of funds coming in. Targeted advocacy efforts, therefore, to ensure the judicious identification, collection, application, accountability, and transparency of sugar taxes to the universal health coverage. It's important, and I'm sure we are all equipped as media practitioners to be able to sail through this. Sugar taxes is one step towards that. Every one of us, media practitioners, is just one illness, sickness, or disease away from sugar-related disease and also poverty when you look at it all. Let us all as citizens, government, policymakers, and legislature begin stronger coalition for health through sugar taxes. It is serious cause for thoughts and action today. We must be deliberate about pro-health taxes. It is its implementation, tracking it to ensure that the funds accruable from these taxes are channeled towards provision of equitable, affordable, quality healthcare delivery services where and when it is needed. I dare to say that this is doable and achievable. And when to start is now, or like my professor would say, like yesterday. And the media has a huge role to play in this. I do hope that the conversation from today will further strengthen our knowledge base that will help us promote all that I've enumerated and what will be the expected outcome of this conversation. Once again, thank you for allowing me to come up with my thoughts. I do hope that it aligns with our discussion today. Over and out. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Mrs. Makanjala. It's very much aligned with every discussion we hope to have for the rest of this afternoon. We thank you for your very wise words. We are very privileged to have you join us today, giving the opening remarks. Your extensive experience, in media really gives us that opening, and your words really lead us into the discussions we're about to have. And you're very right. The media is critical in this discussion. We all know, as you've lived it, the media really is the fourth pillar of democracy and the fourth estate. And what does that mean? The media really is the voice of the public, and the media is there to speak on behalf and to advocate and to inform the public on the different discussions and things that they should be aware of, with a view to empower individuals, communities, and people to make the right decisions for their lives. And that's why we are really focusing today on the role of the media in building a strong advocacy campaign, in disseminating and sharing the messaging about the benefits and the need for this pro-health tax focused specifically on sugar-sweetened beverages. We're quite aware that there are other unhealthy foods that we could be discussing, but given that this is the focus this afternoon and that the Finance Act of 2021 has actually put this in it, then we feel it's very important that we highlight it. I see that we have quite a few of our panelists have now joined. Welcome, Dr. Laz, Dr. Kunala. Welcome to this webinar this afternoon. We now have the first presentation, which I will invite from GHAI. Apologies for that, sorry. So from GHAI, we have Courtney Peters, who will really give us a quick intro into the unique messaging in support of attacks. GHAI, we know, has extensive experience in supporting organizations in building public advocacy campaigns. So today we're very lucky to have two members of GHAI join us today to really share how we can build a communications and advocacy campaign around such an issue as the sugar-sweetened beverage tax. So I will invite Courtney to roll on and start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us. We've really enjoyed this thus far. So my name is Courtney Peters, and I'm the Associate Director of Advocacy at the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. We are actually based in Washington, D.C., but we have teams all around the world, and we work really closely with Gatefield Impact, who invited us here today. So we're very grateful for that. I would also like to introduce my colleague, Elizabeth Orland. She's the Associate Director of Research with the Global Health Advocacy Incubator, and she'll actually be kicking off this presentation. So we're really excited to be here today and talk about really the basics behind sugar-sweetened beverage taxes and why they are a win-win policy solution. And these messages and facts that we're going to present today are really, really helpful for any news stories or media that you might want to put out there. It's important in your messaging to include evidence-based facts around any kind of public health policies that helps you from getting pushback from various industry actors. And then we'll talk a little bit about the implementation side of it. And so what we're going to be looking at coming up in the next 6 to 9 months following the passage of the sugar-sweetened beverage tax, and ways to both protect the tax and also possibly enhance it, and how we continue to do advocacy and media around that as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Elizabeth, who will get us started.
Hi, hopefully you're seeing our screen. Thank you again for the invitation, and thank you, Courtney, for the introduction. So we've heard a little bit about sugar-sweetened beverages, and these are both carbonated and non-carbonated non-alcoholic drinks, which may include malt drinks, sodas, juices, juice drinks, sweetened drinks, sport and energy drinks, as well as dairy and yogurt. Not taxing sugar as a staple good, but sugar and other sweeteners in liquid forms that could become liquid forms, like powders or concentrates. And these drinks have no nutritional value. So what makes Ssbs unhealthy? They're a huge source of added sugar in the diets of those who drink them. Liquid sugar is especially harmful to the body, altering metabolism and other systems. The regular Ssb consumption increases the risk of developing non-communicable diseases known as NCDs, and these range from type 2 diabetes to cardiovascular disease to liver disease. So Ssb taxes are a win for public health as well as for the economy. Ssb taxes reduce consumption. People are generally price sensitive to Ssbs. They're an elastic good, so increasing the price leads to a decrease in demand. The recommendation from WHO, the World Health Organization, and other experts has been to tax these products 20%. Or raise the prices by 20% in order to have the most meaningful impact. The act of the tax, however, and its purpose makes people aware of the harms of these drinks, especially when sensitization occurs prior to implementation. So this can include mass media campaigns and other communications that occur in this period where Nigeria is right now. And SSB taxes, of course, also generate revenue for public programs. And when the revenue goes to public programs, citizens are more likely to support these policies. It's really important, as well as previously mentioned, to have this extra revenue during the COVID-19 period. So this is another reason why it's really important and really great that Nigeria has made this decision. So there's a lot of sugary drink taxes that have occurred throughout the world in the last 10 plus years, with Israel and Nigeria being added to this list as the most recent SSB taxes. So non-communicable diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and others I mentioned earlier are a huge burden to all countries. They're expensive and lead to quality of life losses and years of life lost for many. One study estimated that these diseases could cost the global economy nearly $50 trillion if no actions are taken by 2030, with a lot of the burden falling on low and middle income countries. Taxing SSBs is one of the most cost-effective policy options to reduce this NCD burden. So one study of 6 geographies which have implemented SSB and other sugar product taxes has found that the savings from these taxes, from avoided healthcare costs, as well as from tax revenues, far exceed the cost of implementation. The cost savings range from $87 million to over $150 billion. So one example that I'll give to you today, among many, is South Africa's health promotion levy. So this is about 60 naira per gram of sugar over 4 grams per 100 milliliters. So South African researchers conducted studies to evaluate the effectiveness of the tax. Compared to expected trends from prior to implementation, 1 year after the tax, there was a 50% reduction in sugar and calories consumed, and about a third reduction in volume of beverages purchased per person per day. This also yielded progressive impacts among low socioeconomic status households, where the tax led to greater reductions in purchases by these households and less sugar consumed. It will take a few years to notice these impacts as impacts on overweight, obesity, and non-communicable diseases, but this is really promising to see that these households are consuming less sugar. Finally, the South African researchers have found that the health promotion levy has had no negative impact on employment in related sectors, which is a common argument that's seen throughout the countries that we work in. So now I'll pass it over to Courtney Peters.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. So some of those background facts that Elizabeth presented are things that can be used in media advocacy and policy advocacy to both win people over for a healthy food policy and make sure that it's kept in place. And often it's really important to use case studies from other geographies where something like a sugar sweetened beverage tax has been successful to show that it can be replicated. That's also why evaluation is so important, which we're going to talk about briefly here as well. So some of the best practices pre-implementation. So ideally, these are things that are done before sugar sweetened beverage tax is passed, but these can also continue to be worked upon after the tax is passed as well. So the first thing here is defining the product tax and the tax design. And so Nigeria did a really fantastic job of making sure that the definition of sugar sweetened beverages was as inclusive as possible. And so as a lot of you know, it covers all non-alcoholic sweetened beverages. And so that really makes sure that there's not those little exceptions that can be eked out. And so it's important to protect that really inclusive definition to make sure we cover as many sugary drinks as possible. Also establishing a tax rate that has an effect on consumption. So Elizabeth already mentioned this, but the WHO recommends at least 20% as a minimum for a sugar sweetened beverage tax. And that is because often if a rate is lower, the industry can absorb that on the production side. And so it's never passed on to the consumer. So Nigeria has done a really, really great job at establishing the initial rate, which is around 6.5 to 7%. And so what the recommendation would be is to continue to build upon that, whether that's through an amendment to the Finance Act or many other routes that you can use in Nigeria to enact a sugar sweetened beverage tax. Great foundation, great starting point. Also, it's important to establish how the tax is levied and collected. And so that's something that's going to be really, really important in the next 6 to 9 months, because that's not specified within the Finance Act. And it'll be important to make sure that that's clear so that this tax is actually put into place and that those revenues are being, transparently spent and allocated by the government. Sensitizing the public about the tax is something that's really important before and after. So a huge part of media advocacy is obviously making the public and policymakers aware of A, the public health burden, B, what needs to be done about it, and C, who's responsible. And all of the partners on the call today and many others of you out in Nigeria have done a fantastic job of this over the past few years. And it would be, our hope, obviously, that continues. And I think especially after a tax is passed, it's even more important to make sure that consumers are aware of how that's beneficial for their health and how ultimately it's going to improve the country as a whole. Also, the last two there are just determining whether the tax will be earmarked or ring fenced. So essentially, are the funds from the sugar sweetened beverage tax going to be put back into public programs? Will it be public health programs, something else? If so, that's something that really resonates with consumers. And so it's something that the media can message about as a positive of this tax. And then finally, allowing the opportunity to adjust for inflation is something to consider. So given that this is part of the Finance Act, it's not necessarily part of an annual budgetary bill. It's in there, it's in the act, it's a legislative action. However, if it's going to be increased, that's something that can be looked at as far as an amendment, et cetera. Next slide. So some best practices after implementation. So we're in this ground right now where it was just passed. We have some room to keep working on things. So these are a few things to look at for the next, I would say, year plus. So monitoring and evaluation of the tax. So obviously, a lot of folks on this call, a lot of others all across Nigeria worked so hard to make sure that this tax was passed. And so monitoring it and making sure that it's being effectively implemented and that that tax is actually being placed on those products is really important. So that can be everything from collecting baseline data and follow-up data, monitoring the compliance. And a big part of that is assigning which regulatory body, which agency is responsible for monitoring that compliance and making sure that tax is being collected. And as I mentioned, that's not something that's explicitly spelled out in the act. And so that'll be a really important part of that follow-up. And that will also help with transparency and accountability. So when you're messaging in the media or from an advocacy perspective about this tax, being able to clearly state where the tax proceeds will go is often very helpful. Also monitoring enforcement. Often we'll see that when a tax is passed, there will be price promotions or something to get folks to buy more of these products. So an example of that would be like a buy one, get one free soda. So making sure that those things are not cropping up. And if they are, analyzing how that might be a violation of the tax. And then the last two there are maintaining the tax and guarding against industry interference. So this is going to be really, really key right now. Often we see when a tax is passed, obviously the food and beverage industry is going to have opinions about that. And so it's important to look at what's been achieved, this amazing tax as part of the Finance Act, make sure it's kept in there, and then look at ways to possibly increase it as well. Next slide. So just in conclusion for both Elizabeth and I, the sugary drinks consumption is obviously a huge contributor to obesity, overweight, NCDs, diabetes in particular. And obviously we know Nigeria is leading the continent in diabetes, so this is a major concern. We know that folks who are sick are not productive, they're not happy. And so we need to make sure that we do everything we can from a public health policy perspective to protect people. And also that these liquid forms of sugars, which is different than the kind of sugar that might be found in foods, et cetera, are particularly dangerous because they have no nutritional value, and you might feel like you're full, but it doesn't actually satiate you. And so often folks will drink multiple sugar sweetened beverages and then still eat the same amount of calories, which is what leads to the weight gain and eventual NCDs. So to combat that, SSB taxes have been shown to be evidence-based, effective public health policy against these sugar sweetened beverages, and to also reduce this burden of obesity and NCDs. However, they require thoughtful implementation, pre and post, and also making sure that the tax is being monitored correctly and that the revenue is being collected and allocated correctly. So that'll be something we'll be looking forward to in the next year or so. And then finally, SSB taxes are just one part of the ballgame. I saw a question briefly already asking about, what are the next steps? Can we tax ultra processed foods? Are there other options here? And so the answer is yes. There's a lot that you can do with healthy food policies, and I think this is a fantastic starting point. So there's a whole suite of options, everything from front of package nutrition labels to healthy school food policies that work really nicely in suite with something like a sugar sweetened beverage tax. Next slide. So with that, thank you all for listening to us and having us here. I was going to say all the way from DC, but I guess it's virtually. And I'm sure we'll do a question and answer at the end. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much for introducing me that way. Very wonderful way. And also thank you for the opportunity. There's a lot of conversations already ongoing, and how to harness the power of social media. How to harness the power of social media for policy.
Oh, Kelechi, we can't hear you clearly. You're
okay.
You're breaking
that I'm being heard and seen.
Yeah, we
so
can see.
that I can continue, please.
You can go ahead. You were just breaking. Thank you.
You can see me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. We're just breaking up a bit, so we can hear you now.
So I can go ahead now. Okay, so harnessing the power of social media for trend, and it's a tool that has been deployed for a lot of solution-driven causes, right? So when we talk about social media, we're talking about Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, we're talking about Instagram, we're talking about Snapchat, TikTok, and of course there are other social media platforms that we don't even know about. They are there and they are thriving, just like Bigo. Okay, I'm sure a lot of people haven't even heard that. And the list is endless. However, it is constantly growing. And if we need to solve more problems, we need to actually go with the trends. Okay, so the most effective way that advocacy organizations can leverage on social media as a key element in their digital advocacy tool is to stay abreast with what's happening. That means stay with the trends. For example, we're talking about the sugary drinks tax, and everybody who takes, in fact, the high percentage of people who take these sugary drinks are actually on social media, and day in, day out, every hour, there are advertisements from these companies telling them that, hey, this drink your everyday life, right? So that is why organizations like this who are trying to reduce the intake of these sugary drinks, and when it's been taken, add a tax on it so that it can be used for something better, management of diabetes, of course. That's why these organizations also have to be on these platforms to educate people, whilst the other companies are doing their own advocacy or
Okay, apologies for that. I think we might have lost Dr. Kelechi for a minute. I know we have a very restricted time and we're coming up to the end. I'd like to just invite Dr. Kunala to say a few words briefly, and then I'll hand over to Ome and she can lead us into the moderation of the panel discussion. Dr. Kunala, are you available to say a few words? You wanted to?
Yes, thank you, Vivian. Thank you. I just wanted to listen in, but happy to just jump in very quickly. I think we should just take a cue from Mrs. Makojola's charge. You see, as harmful as these products are, alcohol, tobacco, and sugar that we're talking about now, the opposition is fierce. So we should expect a major pushback from industry. And I think what today's session is trying to do is to lay out some of the arguments that we can use to counter the arguments that the industry will bring forward. So for instance, and we've seen that play out in Nigeria already, where the Nigeria Labour Congress said, look, there are a lot of workers who use soft drinks as staple food. That certainly is not true. And in fact, the science behind that says it's exactly what we're trying to avoid, because soft drinks is not food. In fact, soft drinks is what causes, without going into the science of it, it's not nutritious at all. It is not food. Rather, it harms your body by leading to what causes obesity, what distorts metabolism in your body, and your body will not even be able to process sugar properly. So we would like to lay out some of these arguments and make the literature available to our media advocates and journalists so that we are able to discountenance some of those positions. Another position is that of industry saying the poor are most affected. Again, this is not true. In fact, what this tax does is that when you bring in a tax, you are reducing the consumption of that product. And at the end of the day, it is this same set of people that will benefit by not suffering from these diseases, especially in a country that does not have social health insurance. So is it not better for the poor man not to have hypertension, not to have diabetes, not to have renal failure? The thought that industry usually will say is, oh, this affects unemployment. It would increase unemployment. Again, this is not true, because there are several things that industry can do. They can begin to reformulate and reduce the sugar content in these drinks. Anyway, last point I'll make is that, like we heard in the PowerPoint presentation, the rates right now are extremely low. There's a possibility that industry might even absorb all of these taxes and not raise the prices of these colas in Nigeria. But the fact that the government of Nigeria has introduced this tax is a first step, and a good one at that. So it means that we need to continue to escalate our advocacy so that the rates can begin to be increased on a year-on-year basis, so that we are able to achieve that goal of disincentivizing the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. And that secondary advantage of bringing in additional public financing to support Nigeria's universal health coverage aspirations. I yield back to you, Vivian.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Dr. Kunala, for highlighting those points. Just so we all know, Dr. Kunala is a senior health specialist at the World Bank and has really been one of the forces behind, the introduction of such a excise duty. Before I hand over to Ome, I just want to remind you all of our third and final webinar, which will be on Tuesday, the 1st of February at 2:00 again. And that one now focus on addressing the increasing prevalence of NCDs in Nigeria through pro-health taxes. And I think we will now dig deep into a lot of the NCDs that have been mentioned during the sessions today on Tuesday. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Ome. Ome is the health communications of Gatefield, and she will now moderate the the panel discussion, and Gatefield will now close the webinar session thereafter. So Ome, I hand over to you to now lead the panel discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Vivian. And I'd like to thank Nigeria Health Watch again for initiating this most timely series of webinars. Today at our panel discussion, we have a lineup of exceptional speakers who will lend their expertise to discuss communication and media engagement strategies to promote these pro-health sweetened beverage taxes and to counter industry opposition. And it's been very enlightening to listen to the first few speakers, particularly the call to action that Mrs. Makanjuola provided for us to keep the conversation going. And such a webinar is part of the process of us keeping the conversation going. And it is encouraging to see members of the media in attendance. And I hope that you will be engaging with us throughout. For the panel session, our previous speakers will be joined by 3 other panelists. Dr. Lumide has already given some remarks, but I hope that you will be here for the rest of the session. We'll also be joined by Dr. Laz, who is a public health physician, a health policy advocate, and the CEO of Talk Health Nigeria, a health communications advocate, and Matthew Ogune, who is a writer with Guardian newspapers in Nigeria. So today we turn the spotlight on the role of advocacy and communications as we explore the use of a strong advocacy campaign to communicate the benefits of SSB taxes. And as we have seen, Nigeria has implemented a 10 naira per litre excess tax in the Finance Act, and we have begun to see opposition to the tax. Industry players have launched media campaigns focused on the potential negative impact of the tax on the economy, and members of the public have questioned, why do we need a tax? And so strong, clear messaging is crucial because it will first make the public privy to the existence of a tax and then help them understand the reason for the tax and lead to this public support for which we are seeking. So I'd like to start by asking, I don't think Mrs. Makanjuola is here with us anymore. So I see Dr. Laz is here. Welcome, Dr. Laz. So we hear that industry arguments such as taxes won't actually reduce NCDs and people should be responsible for their own health, not governments, or even arguments like taxes harm the poor and cause job losses. So Dr. Laz, I'd like you to speak a little bit on how we can advance our messaging to decisively counter these arguments.
Right, thank you very much. Yes, the content of the message is very important and has to be evidence-based. So right now, this tax is somewhat new in the country, and a lot of the evidence we are going to advance, is based on perhaps studies in other countries where this has been implemented. And that's why I really liked the strong recommendation that involves monitoring and evaluation, so that we'll see, what we could use. But before we even get to that stage of getting local evidence to support this, yes, there is multiple evidence in different countries where this has been implemented. It's arguable whether just 5% or thereabout is sufficient to give us the same results, comparing it to those who have up to 20% or much more than the percentage of SSB tax to be introduced. But this calls for more tracking, at every stage of it. And we can also advance an argument of the potential futuristic effects and also the demography that this could be most affected. If we make a generalistic argument that yes, if we don't do this, it's obesity, diabetes, and all of that. Counter arguments could be, wow, I've been taking these beverages for the last 40 years. I'm 50, I don't have diabetes, I don't have obesity, and all of that. So within our environment, we have to look at which population is most affected. We have rising cases of childhood obesity in the country, especially among the middle class, urban residents, and all of that. So it makes it stronger when we're able to disaggregate the data and be very much more specific, so that it could also be, much more believable. So it has to be sustained in the media over a period of time. How we advocates or nonprofit organizations usually do is during days, national days or international days or press conferences, we put out content out there. and it just makes news for 1 or 2 days, So, but the industry players keep advertising every day. They keep getting influencers, using multiple channels, and even sponsoring research to counter whatever we're presenting. So I quite agree with the suggestion that there's a fierce opposition, and we have to be on top of the game, to be able to make impact in the media. There have to be media partnerships, that is long-lasting and mutually beneficial, to enable various media platforms to present this, and also, having to make the media practitioners much more knowledgeable about this. Of course, a good number of them are here and they are reading up, but these messages need to penetrate as much as possible using multiple platforms. Radio goes very wide across the country, but you have so many of them across different states and different programs. Television also has its own audience, but also looking at NCDs in this case, which population is most likely going to be beneficial. We also know the correlation between long hours of watching TV and inactivity. So, and also someone that is watching TV for long hours is also more likely to get a sugar sweetened beverage, to keep by the side and be sipping it while he or she watches the favorite program on TV. So the inactivity of sitting for long hours, and also the Ssb consumption, because they don't want to leave their seats to make other food, is in itself a risk factor. And those correlations are things that, in terms of targeting the channels and also the platforms through these messages get out, we also need to know which media platforms to prioritize and which populations to prioritize in getting the messages out. Over.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laz, for that comprehensive answer. And indeed, we need to come at this from all sides, because the opposition is continuous and it is fierce. And you also mentioned the need for multiple platforms. So here we're talking about traditional media, social media, digital advocacy, as well as the need to educate the media. And one thing that sugar sweetened beverage taxes do is that they raise public awareness of the harms of Ssb consumption, because when these taxes are first introduced, people are more likely to ask, what's the reason for the tax? And as they ask these questions, the answers emerge. And part of the answer is that these Ssbs have no nutritional value, and all they do is harm your health. Now, to sustain some of this conversation around industry opposition, I'd like to ask Courtney or Elizabeth here. The beverage industry tends to maintain a corporate public image. This is just going by what Dr. Laz has previously said about how the media, how the beverage industry sometimes sponsors coalitions. But apart from that, they also sponsor local scholarships, among other charitable initiatives. And this can be a barrier to pro-tax messaging. So what strategies can we apply to counter this corporate image that the beverage industry projects? Courtney or Elizabeth?
Thanks, Ome. That's a great question. And, I want to start out by stating that sugar sweetened beverages, which I saw there were some questions in the chat about the use of the word sugar as a commodity versus sugar sweetened beverages. We strongly recommend emphasizing in communications the beverage aspect of that, just because, to the question about industry, the sugar industry is separate from the folks who are making the sugar sweetened beverages. So that's just an aside. But I think a lot of people on this call have been working on public health for probably, years, decades, and food and beverages are distinctly different than something like tobacco or alcohol. We can easily come out and say that tobacco isn't good for anyone, right? There are no benefits to cigarettes, but people have really close personal ties to food and to beverages. It means something to them. It signifies something for them. And especially sugar sweetened beverages, a lot of people have that psychological tie, whether it's from childhood or remembering having a Coca-Cola at a family event. And so that posits a particular challenge for us. And so something that we can do to combat that is to point out the industry's bad behavior, to call them out for the things that they're doing that are negative, because they often do try to use corporate social responsibility, whether that's scholarships or, you know, sponsoring a school, et cetera, to kind of blur the negative parts of their image. And so I would encourage media advocates, policy advocates to point out the things that they aren't doing right, which is A, creating products that harm and possibly kill people, B, covering up these things with corporate social responsibility, et cetera. They evade taxes. That's another huge part of it. So in Nigeria, I think it's almost all of the major soda companies, it might be all of them, have not paid customs duty since the early 90s. So that's something to call out and highlight. That's a problem. And so I think, you know, we can work in tandem by pointing out the benefits of a tax, health, economic, otherwise, while jointly calling out the things the industry is doing on the flip side. And those two things in conjunction for both consumers and policymakers really highlight A, who's the problem here, and B, how do we address the problem? Elizabeth, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so in some of the countries that we work in, advocates take a position and they monitor the industry and their activities. So that is something that advocates and media can do and ensure that that all of the behaviors are being documented, that you can track these, you can see what kind of interference is playing out in policies and otherwise.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I think, you know, one more point, most everyone knows this, but I think often the public does not. The level at which the industry, whether it's tobacco, food and beverage, alcohol, is in bed with politicians and with government stakeholders. And I think it's important to conduct mappings, whether that's stakeholder mappings, power mappings, et cetera, to show those linkages. And call out those policymakers and those legislators who are making decisions based on special interests and based on corporate interests versus what's best for their citizenry. Thanks, Ome.
All right. Thank you very much, Courtney, for that answer. And I particularly want to hinge on to the comment that you just made about how beverage companies are in bed with politicians, so to speak. And so I'd like to address my next question to somebody from the media. I see Mrs. Mojima Konjuola has rejoined us. So I'd like to ask Mrs. Makonjuola and Matthew as well afterward. You know,
I'm here.
Seen as the media. Yes, okay. It's nice to hear your voice again, Ma. Seen as the media is a key driver of social change, from which people, you know, gain information to make decisions. And we live in a country where historically the levels of trust for the government have been low. And where the tax is concerned, many voices have arisen to argue against it. How can we harness the media to build citizens' trust in this government policy, particularly in terms of the tax?
That's a tough one, but we'll try and navigate through it. Yes, we're at a season and at a time in our country's development where trust for government interventions does not fly. And so as good as some of the intentions are, it has generated a lot of mistrust. But then again, the media has the tool to unravel this. Now, how can the media do this? You recall during the polio eradication initiative, we had at a time in Nigeria where parents and even state governments were saying no to the to the vaccines that were brought to the country. At some point, we had to like crisscross the world, as it were, to go around the world and showcase that the same vaccines that Nigerian children are being administered with are the same that are used all over the world. A lot of politics was brought in, and of course, you know, with us, it has to do with religion and politics and the rest of it. So I think at this level, the Nigerian media are very conversant with all these issues that plays into mistrust and interventions. What I would say, and I think Dr. Laz, listening to him, also alluded to it, is that we need first to get the buy-in of the media, get them to understand. And I think Dr. Lumide also says something that we need also to watch and quickly close the gap, as important as it is for us to know that the manufacturers or the industrialists that are, you know, serving us these sugar-coated drinks and the likes of it are not resting themselves. They have engaged the NLC. We also must counter-engage the NLC. We must build, I always say, a media cell that understands the impact of what we are talking about. So at any time they will use their platform to be able to articulate what we are doing here today. I mean, the benefits, the impact, why it is important, and what are the gains therein. And I'm sure that if we push it from non-government circles or non-government intervention, like the media, the CSOs and the rest of it, we'll get a lot of mileage from that. But it is also important that that's why my presentation, you know, gave a little background of the impact and speaking to why we need as media to embrace it. Of course, we won't get everyone on our table, but we should try to get at least 70%. And I'm sure that would go a long way. And I always say that it's not just about the Turanchi or the English that we speak here on the webinars. It is about us engaging with the people where they are, where they live, in their local languages, so that they themselves would understand what the campaign or what we're talking about, and they we can have their buy-in. The media in Nigeria, and we have several platforms that we can use. We have the Health Correspondents Association of Nigeria that deals with health-related matters. Once we get their buy-in, we have the Nigerian Guild of Editors that are very pro-health in terms of what they're doing. Once we get those people in, and I'm sure that we can, you know, we can actually move ahead. I'm happy that I can see the health correspondent of the Guardian newspaper. I really can't see a lot of other media practitioners here. But the earlier we engage them, we have the Nigerian Association of Women Journalists. A lot of these platforms exist that we need to engage like yesterday, moving forward with this drive to reduce the impact of sugar, on our health indicators in the country. I hope I'm making some sense. Over.
Thank you so much, Mr. Makanjuola. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's definitely encouraging to see the number of media practitioners present here. Apologies. So, Matthew, do you want to add to that, to Mr. Makanjuola's?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Matthew.
You can hear me. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Matthew.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm very happy to be here today, but I really do not align myself with most of the positions of past speakers, especially, are you with me? Are you with me?
Yes, I can hear you, Matthew.
Especially, yeah, especially in the area of advertising every day and the media platform to prioritize population. One thing I believe, it's often believed that the media is just a tool of passing out information. But above this, I believe we have targeted audience, and this audience is supposed to be the entire population, not a few out of the population, and also the authentic voices. Beyond organizing press conferences, if you invite me for a press conference, definitely there is a story you might want to be, you might have had in mind to push out. I will only push out what you give to me. But what I will like to advise in media advocacy, there are instances where you send reporters out. You empower the media practitioners, individual journalists, and even engage the full media house. Let them go out and speak to those people, those targeted audience. I have had a situation whereby the Ministry of Nigeria Data had to send me to Port Harcourt, to Warri Creeks, to investigate most of those things that politicians do sponsor out, engage the government to say this is what is going on and all that. But when you go there, you see that these things are really not on ground. So what I feel is that there's a need for us to really bring the media close, individual journalists out, and have this one-on-one talk with these people, because we are here today. We are on a webinar. So many Nigerians don't even know what a webinar is. So many people don't pay attention to the newspapers. So many people don't even have access to the radio, the television, and all that. So when we engage them and talk to them one-on-one, send people out, send journalists out on investigative reports, let them know the mind of the people, talk to the people one-on-one. Because even if we do all the talking here and there, it is still the lawmakers that are going to implement this law. And they work directly with the constituents. So if you have succeeded in getting the mind of the constituents one-on-one, tell them the advantage and disadvantage of this of this bill, I believe you might have solved 70% of the problem. So anything you succeed in putting inside of them, that is what they are going to tell their lawmakers when they return home. And don't forget, this is electionary season. Lawmakers will definitely go back home. So it is very important. It is very important. People go out to sensitize these people one-on-one, tell them, preach the gospel to them, so that at least those that don't have access to newspaper, radio, TV, and all that, at least they will have people on ground talking to them, telling them about the disadvantage of this SSB, so that it won't look as if
right.
you are only.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you so much for your input. And I know that Dr. Laz might have wanted to respond to this. I want to just let us know that we are 12 minutes behind the hour right now. This webinar should have ended at 3 p.m. But Dr. Laz, if you can give a 30-second response to Matthew's comment. I know you already made some comment about this, but please, 30 seconds, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't think there is any controversy there. I see that perhaps there's somewhat kind of what I say. Why we target everyone in the messaging, but the message has to be directed, especially in terms of the content, and that was the point I made. Because it's not just about pushing out a certain message. The message has to be in such a way that it's believable. In our environment, or among population, there are different demographics. If, for instance, in the United States, some parts of the world, in Mexico and all of that, you could have where obesity is largely a challenge for poor people who could, who depends a lot on pizza, soda, and all of that for most of their meals. So with significant proportion of that. So if you use message that is directed towards that population and you use it in Nigeria, it's not going to resonate, no matter how much you repeat it in the media. So my point is, while we, prepare the content, we know the demographics that you target. Young people are predominant on social media. So if message that is targeting mostly young people on this same issue, you're using it to play it more on TV, maybe at night when it's mostly older people that watch TV at night, then it's not going to resonate. So that's essentially the point I'm trying to make, that in our content, we have in mind that whichever media platform we are using, these the demography that is predominantly looking at it, and the message should speak more to that demography.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Laz. Thank you, Dr. Laz. We are out of time. It is 3:14 p.m. now. I'd like us to end in 90 seconds, if possible. I want to just mention that there is a Q&A box open, and some of the questions have been answered. I know Elizabeth has addressed a question from Oladimeji. And if you'd like to read that question and answer in depth, please open the Q&A box. I think there might also be some responses in the chat box. I'd like to thank all the panelists this afternoon for joining us, for lending their voices. Really has been so enlightening. Dr. Kunola, Elizabeth, Courtney, Mrs. Makonjola, Dr. Laz, and Matthew. Thank you so much again to Nigeria Health Watch for this webinar series. It has been very enlightening, and I'd like to just call on Shirley to give the vote of thanks. I don't know if Shirley is present here. If she's not, I will just call on Vivian. Shirley, are you available for the vote of thanks?
Okay, don't worry about it. Hello, let me just, because we've already overrun as
well, yes.
As Omei mentioned. I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I know we always invite you to various webinars, but this is one that affects everybody. When we talk about NCDs, sometimes it feels it's abstract, but NCDs I know touches on everybody's lives if you have children, parents, etc. And I think it's important that we highlight these discussions beyond just talking about it in the context of sugar sweetened beverages. As you know, I mentioned in my opening, Nigeria is plagued with a lot of communicable diseases currently, and we all live and hear about them: cholera, Lassa fever, yellow fever, etc. However, what often gets neglected and we don't discuss enough is the rising incidence of NCDs. And this goes beyond just diabetes that we often talk about. But we also have to remember other NCDs like cancer and hypertension. And these really are very, very expensive diseases. Why such a tax, we hope, earmarked for health should bring more funds into the health sector. So just to round up and really to say once again, thank you ever so much, everybody who was able to join us this afternoon on this, our second of 3 webinar series. On Tuesday, the 1st of February is our 3rd and final web series. When I say final, whilst it may be the final in the 3 webinar series, this is not the end to these discussions. I think Mrs. Makonjola gave some fantastic insights into how in Nigeria we can continue to push these discussions using the different platforms and journalist networks that we have. I'd like to especially thank, of course, GHAI, really, with their vast experience in working across diverse geographies, have really been able to support in providing the guidance or from that experience in the technical messaging for such a campaign as the sugar sweetened beverage taxation in Nigeria. So Courtney and Elizabeth, thank you ever so much. I know there's a time difference between us and you on the other side of the world, but we are very grateful that you're able to join us this afternoon. Dr. Kunola, thank you ever so much for joining us this afternoon again. And Dr. Laz, thank you. As we all know, Dr. Laz has his show every Tuesday on AIT. Let me give you a quick plug. I know you're very passionate about using the media to advocate and inform the public about a lot of these health issues. So Dr. Laz, thank you ever so much for joining us this afternoon. And Matthew from Guardian, thank you very much for joining us as well this afternoon. And of course, Kelechi, who is there to give us the opening remarks. So without further ado, on behalf of my team at Nigeria Health Watch, we'd like to thank you, and we hope you can join us again on Tuesday, the 1st of February, where we really dig deep into discussing some of these NCDs that Nigeria and many countries globally really is plagued with. So without further ado, I'd like to bring this webinar to a close, and thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Goodbye and have a good afternoon. Over.